prosecuted, or not prosecuted, but was held accountable for a particular on a particular project,
Right.
because they'd not they'd taken on the responsibility for as builts, or making sure as builts were delivered, and when they clearly didn't have the scope or the authority to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons. But the long and short of it is that if you go through the spreadsheet, as this guy was doing with me, he's quite right that they've taken out there's no regulation 38 in there.
Yep.
So we think that probably needs to be addressed. Don't know whether anybody else is using it that might have a view. Is anybody else doing principal designer building regs role? Doesn't look like it.
Joe, any experience from your team on or your colleagues?
Not that I'm aware of. No, no. I think we do have a couple of people in the practice who are doing the role, but how they're doing it, I'm really not sure. So,
yep. I think the what I will do is it would be useful, George, if you could maybe share or link me to that person that you spoke to, because then I can sort of talk in more detail with them. My initial gut feeling, not that it comes from any mega point of expertise on that, is that it may be that things like Regulation 38 and some of the others, because that tracker was predominantly to do with the relevant regulations or relevant ones. So I know when Dieter set it up, he was looking at it from that point of view, and there was a reason why it's not every single one is in there, whether it's to do with what you noted about, an RIBA member or something, or whether Dieter had a different filter in mind when he was setting it up, is something that I can, because I've sort of emailed Dieter a couple of times about it. So it would be useful to have that smaller discussion with the gentleman you spoke to, and we can also ask Dieter directly, because to be fair, he did it under his own steam. I think under actually more the Eric Perry architects, but and then I can also ask. There's a gentleman from Stroma who's helping us or advising Waits on the project we're doing, to get his, because he's been a building control, previous sort of building control role for many years, and he has also advised on like the building safety regulator. So, and he really does like his legislation and understands the legislation really well. So I can ask both parties, to be honest, because it will be obviously really important if there are things that you're missing. So yeah,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind sharing or just kind of emailing and copying me into that other person, that'd be great.
Well, no, I what I prefer to do, because he's a consultant himself.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is I could introduce you to him.
Yeah.
And we could have a conversation. But he's a bit frustrated that that Rebra just provided a spreadsheet, and now that's a tick in the box that everybody can follow without actually properly understanding what the detail is. Now, whether he's right or wrong, I don't know. Right,
No.
But he's very knowledgeable.
Well, that's good. Be good to understand.
Let's pick up separately if that's okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, definitely. But it's obviously important if you're missing something major. Franco, I don't think we've met before. Thank you for joining. Do you want to let us know a little bit about yourself, or are you an architect or consultant? You're on mute, I think.
Can you hear us, Franco? Yeah, you can hear us, but you're on mute. Your microphone's on mute.
Okay.
Okay.
There
Okay,
you go.
Oh.
We can hear you.
Hello, good, well, morning for me, afternoon for you. I'm speaking from Florence in Italy. I've known George for some time. We've had many discussions on data and this kind of stuff. This is the first time I participate to this group, and so for the time being, I will be mainly listening. If you want to know a little bit about myself, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've worked for many years in project management, project controls, and in the last probably decade, I have become particularly interested in data management. I wouldn't classify myself as a data scientist, but I have suffered from the lack of structure in managing data. One of the words I have pronounced most frequently in my life is common language, an obstacle I have encountered in many situations, in many countries, in many projects. I worked almost all my life overseas. So in my almost 50 years of experience, I spent 45 years overseas in international projects. So I have encountered the kind of problem I mentioned in many countries. So I think it is a real problem to manage data properly. So this is in a nutshell what I have been doing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and welcome to the team.
Thank you.
And James Dixon, I don't think we've necessarily met before as well. It'd be good to know a little bit about yourself as well, please.
Morning. Sorry. Yes, I was a few minutes late, but pardon. I have been working in main contracting typically for the last 12, 13 years. Prior to that, design side, both clients and consultancy, but I suppose the vast majority of my career has been spent main contracting, now coming through the design management function. I've spent a long time looking at process that goes within that discipline. Design management in the UK is very significant and an important role given the design and build nature of contracts. So trying to disseminate what's good and place that in the purview of site teams. My role has developed and my interest has developed beyond what good design looks like to incorporate actually where are we with design in terms of progress. I see a lot of opportunity for improvement in terms of productivity when it comes to design. In construction, my experience, we plan very carefully how much concrete, how many doors, how many walls we will erect, all of that good stuff. I think that the planning of actual release of information could and should be better, and data helps us to actually track where we are with information release. And probably the last 3, 4, 5 years, I've spent a lot of time trying to help project teams actually keep them on track. I'm often on call for when's the schedule being released, when's the door layouts being released, and wall layouts and the responses. Hopefully by the end of the month, that sort of response wouldn't cut much mustard if we were in a construction world, when we would ask, the HVACs, are they being installed on Friday? It's much more binary, whereas in design, we seem to be more accepting of a loose commitment, whereas I'm trying very hard to actually, and there's a lot of it is on us. We need to know when our procurement is, what's long lead, and therefore what information we need, and just manage it. So I suppose that's a little bit deep dive into why I'm interested in data. Sorry about it.
No, thank you very much. Well, as we're doing a little introductions, Pierre, I don't know whether Pierre, you want to give a quick overview, and then Joe, and then I'll introduce myself, and then just to kind of let you know where we are in terms of this panel of discussion, and then take it from there.
We've got 2 Pierres, by the way.
Yeah, that's clearly not me. Which one?
No,
Which Pierre?
I'll go in alphabetical order, Sergio. Who's... Yeah, you got Venter, but what's your surname, Pierre? The on...
Sonal with an S. So I
Oh,
guess
well, you
I'm
go
just
first then.
slightly in front. Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Me, I'm an architect by training, but we are involved with our company, Arc Digital, in building information modeling. So we create the digital twins in many countries. So experience span the UK originally, but we are involved now in the Middle East, mainly Saudi Arabia, North Africa with Morocco, Nigeria, and Senegal, and have worked on every continent in different degrees for other architects, engineers, construction company. So we have that experience in digitalizing the built environment. And we are pushing now to the next step because we started earlier this year a new startup to automate the scan to BIM process from point clouds, creating an IFC model automatically from the point cloud data generated by a LiDAR scan. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. Thank you, and very happy to be there. And George, thank you again for bringing us on board some time ago.
Yeah, one of the things that's just worth mentioning that you've not you've not said there, Pierre, is that we were brought together by Soccertech. Now, Soccertech, I don't know if you know them, but they're major building control people. It's one of their roles, and they've brought me together with as active plan together with Pierre, and we've been exploring something that's joined up there. So just thought I'd mention that.
Yes, thank you, George. Yes, it also comes from an experience we had with one of our building having to go through Gateway 3 with the new building safety regulator. We were one of the first two schemes, I think, in the UK who got granted Gate 3 approval with a scheme which wasn't supposed to go through Gateway 3. Completion was delayed on site. And one of the reasons why we managed to go through is because of the BIM model we developed. So we had a BIM model as built before even we went on site. So we were able to demonstrate that during the design process, we put in place all the measures which were required. We were able to show the differences with what has been built on site, update our model, and use the as-built to show that even if we were not structured to go through Gateway 3, the process we put in place from a design, BIM, and construction perspective complied. So that has been quite a journey, but that brought us way closer to the issues around building control, principal designer, be it XCDM or building regs.
That's really interesting, Pierre. Was that one of the ones in Wembley? Was that a project in Wembley or something?
No, it was in next to Limehouse in East London, a 52 unit scheme, which had the complexity as well to have been abandoned by a previous contractor. So we had to deal with existing structure on site, existing work partly done, a listed facade that the council wanted to retain, which we modeled from point clouds. So yeah, we had a bit of everything on that project, and hopefully arrived on top of things.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you've gone through the difficult route, which actually has probably meant you've learned a lot at the same time. So fantastic. Pierre and then Joe, and then we'll kind of go in from there.
Yeah, just very quickly, architect by profession, not registered in the UK. I'm a BIM consultant, interested in data, interested in the data management over the lifetime of a building from the AEC plus OO, owner operator. I've been in the Middle East, I've been in UAE, Saudi Arabia. What's really important for me is I'm doing a presentation on Thursday at the BIM Coordinator Summit in Ireland on performance matters. And it's basically two parts. The first one is performance is important, but it's also the things that make up performance. And I think all too often in the discussions that I've heard so far is that we don't pay enough attention to actually measuring a benchmark having a look at the process and then what we get out of it. So James, in a way, it's tying in with what you're looking at, is that the data is available, but who owns it, who nurtures it, who looks after it. And George knows well, you know, that's what you're going to do at the end of the day. It's going to become the asset management. So my interest is in all of those things: architecture, design, and the technology, etc. So thank you.
Fantastic. And Joe?
Yeah, I'm an architect by training also, but my current role is a BIM manager for AHR. We're a company of architects and building surveyors. We have quite a strong scan to BIM team in house. So I was quite interested to see what Pierre was saying there about trying to automate those processes. But over my role as a BIM manager, I've kind of seen the transition from 2D AutoCAD to, I mean, I've seen other transitions prior to that as well, but from 2D AutoCAD into 3D Revit and BIM modeling, and that's been great. And we've kind of ticked that box in a way. I think in the design team we've all got these great efficiencies, but I've always been interested in kind of what next, you know, and how do we shift the focus away from geometry, you know, kind of Revit and BIM being about geometry and automating drawings, which is kind of, that's all great, but how do we shift the focus towards the data? Because I've always had this kind of personal challenge of kind of how do we weigh the quality or measure the quality of BIM data? You know, I can have two models that appear to be identical, one of which is usable and the other one maybe not so. So I'm kind of really interested in how do we shift that, particularly from an architect's perspective, because I've said this a few times, and as an architect, I think I can say this safely, that, you know, creative architects are great at design, but maybe not necessarily data focused. That's not necessarily our strong point as architects in the industry. So yeah, I'm kind of learning all sorts from this group and all the other workshop groups that I'm involved in.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. I don't know if anyone else who's on the call who wants to reveal themselves as such, or more than happy for you to kind of listen in and ask questions as required. But anyone else in the group who wants to do a quick introduction? Okay, just carry on. Myself, I'm Das from David Miller Architects. We're practiced for about 20 between Liverpool and London. I've sort of taken the role more of a technical director, and then, but also interested in the CDM and the Building Safety Act principal designer roles, which we offer across different projects and across different sectors as well. So I'm kind of working with and known George for, I think, something like 12, 13 years. And it sort of has grown into talking about the, you know, BIM in housing, BIM4Housing, and trying to kind of find the practical solutions that designers within the design working group can do, need to do, can follow to navigate various regulation requirements, but also as the team here, there's a lot of sort of BIM and data discussions as well. And I think they're kind of coming together because historically, in the practice, when I first started, let's say like 15 years ago, we moved into using just Revit as a tool, and then wanted to always kind of stay ahead, a bit like you, Joe, just sort of stay ahead, look at what the next thing might be. And data, the reason for using tools and digital workflows has changed from one of efficiency, I think, one of collaboration, and now I think to one of statutory requirements, post the kind of contractual requirements that came in sort of 2015. So it's interesting how that kind of almost the stick and the carrot has changed quite a bit. We are now having to use digital tools, the data, outputting them to simply kind of make sure that what we're doing is compliant. We can demonstrate it, we can evidence it, and we can audit it. So that's kind of where we're coming again. And in this, it is really quite interesting to see the team today because it's quite international. But all of you have had obviously input in into some of the gateway stuff as well. And what I was going to do, what I did in the last meeting, was just give an update on a project, which it's on the face of it, it's quite straightforward, and it's around the gateway process. So it's a scheme where we are recladding parts of a block of a number of blocks within a site just by Canary Wharf, but the building was done built something like 25 years ago, so not very old. But it's interesting where the existing so Waits are the contractors on that scheme, for example, and under what's called a developer's pledge, they've gone back and are looking at schemes that they've done in the past, which may need remediation work. Not necessarily, nothing to do with the fact that they wouldn't have been compliant when they were built, but more because there's obviously things like timber cladding, like on this particular scheme, which they are essentially going back to remediate under that developer's pledge. So it's the first kind of project that we're going through, and I'm going through the gateway process. In timeline wise, we've gone through a pre-app process. We're about to go in for planning in a couple of weeks' time to remove some of the timber cladding and the timber decking to balconies and replace that. So it's not contentious as such, which is again quite a good thing for a pilot project. But to be fair to Waits, and they've appointed various specialists to help and advise the team, including sort of facade consultants, gentleman from Stroma, another sort of registered building control approver to advise the team, structural engineer, fire consultant, and ourselves. So we've got a nice team. So we go for planning in a couple of weeks with Gateway 2 submission at the end of January, and then we see how long that goes. I don't know. I think a lot of you involved may already know that there's obviously quite a long delay from the statutory kind of period or the kind of target period that the building safety regulator has put to actually getting approvals through the gateway. And I think part of this group and other groups are trying to share best practice so that we unblock that kind of issues that are happening, because it'll benefit all of us. So more of us that learn from each other about the information required, how to submit information, how to kind of make it easy to understand, the quicker we get the kind of backlog clarified, and the more projects can get to site, which I think is obviously what we all want to happen. But yeah, so from the last meeting, we had some, and this is sort of feels quite what's the word, analog in a way, but it's just kind of sharing a couple of the things, that the trickiness that we're going through as well. I'll just share some photographs from the site so you can get an idea what the scheme is. Oh, sorry, George.
Could I just say something about what you just said there, please, just for a second? I don't want to disrupt your presentation, but I just wanted to reinforce the importance of the data that Joe was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And how it all hangs together. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that we're doing, as ActivePlan, we're doing audits of schemes that have been delivered, and what we're doing is we're looking at things that are likely to get picked up, like the fire and emergency file, and some of the basics that we thought would be reasonable to expect, like door schedules having the same references as the drawing that's on that's being provided, which I think is a fairly reasonable thing to expect. It's quite shocking that we're finding that isn't the case. What we're also finding is that even the COBie data isn't consistent with what has been in the model, and it's certainly not consistent with the schedules. Now, I'm just mentioning that because the whole point, I think, of I mean, it's a complex enough thing for building information to be provided anyway. But if we end up with a more fragmented, and people have gone in and manually edited them, for example, it's chaos. So one of the things the whole point really of what we did, 5 years ago when we set up this BIM4Housing group is really to look at what information is being passed from party to party and try and look to see how can we make it so that, for example, the information that you as designers receive from developers is structured in such a way that you can use it easily. And correspondingly, if you're passing information on to contractors or you're passing them on to asset teams, it's important that that comes through as well. And one way of doing that is making sure that it's all machine readable. Now, on a project that we're working on at the moment, we needed to check the door schedules. Now, the door schedules, because they were supplied by as part of 4 different packages, the door schedules were all completely different. And they weren't provided as spreadsheets. They were just images in a O&M PDF. So for us to do anything with them, we've had to strip them out of the PDF and convert them back to data, which obviously in itself is a dodgy thing to do, but that's what we've done. And then we can start to find where the inconsistencies are. But all of that's unnecessary if we provide the information in a machine readable form. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And the final thing is that a lot of the things that we need from an asset management point of view are often never delivered in the BIM models because it's the level of detail that, for example, designers don't go down to because, that it's not really part of your scope in many cases. But
do you have an example of that, George? Sorry.
I would say the actuators,
Right.
for example, are very seldom modelled.
Well,
door closers,
okay,
door closers aren't normally modelled. Yeah. Now, obviously, they should be in schedules which are referenced properly to the door type, but we also find that door types aren't provided either. We end up just with instances of doors. This is competence of the people that are creating models in many cases, but also I think to some extent the fragmentation. So I don't want to sort of hijack what Daz is running through, which so I'm going to step back now, but I just thought I'd mention that. Pierre, you were going to say something.
Yes, sorry, just on that, maybe more a question than an answer, is it brings a question of how much we model and how much we input in terms of data. Because you mentioned those stoppers and a lot of elements. Our view is they shouldn't be modeled because they create sometimes unnecessary additional geometry, which makes the models heavier. However, the data should be embedded in it at the right location to be found by the right people. So just that big question of frugality in terms of modeling is always an interesting one.
It is, but I would also say that one of the challenges with that, I believe, so I'm told, is if we're reliant on IFC as the mechanism of exchanging that information, then the IFC definitions often don't have adequate detail to be able to do it. So we can have situations where things are lost because we're using, understandably, the open standard to exchange things.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can come in there, I think something that's really important, my approach to this thing is what I'll call the placeholder. So that actually a door, as long as the geometry and the spatial parts are correct, in other words, a door is a door set. It's got frame sets, ironmongery, door lock and latch sets, etc. Is then in fact those pieces could be separated. The geometry, the spatial issues, as long as that's correct, it's going to be in the right place. But all of the components that go into that could in fact be a list if you were talking about Dynamo or any of the data set processes. And what it is, the two tie together, and George, that goes into the IFC. But what it is the term I'm going to use is called a performance spec. In other words, if I have a door and it's a fire door, it says it's got to perform in a certain way, it's got to operate in a certain way. And that can actually be done in a digitally readable form, because now you get the geometry and you actually get the data at the same time. Yes, this is a text file, but you can actually go that little bit further. And George, you could be putting the uniclass classification in there as well. So now not only are you picking up that there's got to be a door closer, but you know exactly what category it belongs to, what classification it belongs to, which starts tying it up further down there. So a little bit simplistic, but that's the one mechanism.
Yep. Yep. An architect needs to produce a door schedule that tallies with what components relate to that door. That's not BIM, that's not digital, that is for in time immemorial, that's something they need to produce. So parametrically, having a basic description, a little bit of text that identifies this as an actuator or a door closer, enables the architect to produce the schedule they always needed to produce. Once it's parametrically in there, we can export that with P-sets into the IFC reliably, consistently, every single time, and produce your Kobe. It is linear. I've seen it. I completely agree. But yeah, you don't need to model for model's sake. Door closer, you could probably live without, but it does need to be identified against the right doors, and that has to be in the schedule. They do it parametrically. Their schedule is just done automatically. It's not complicated and it's not onerous, in my opinion.
And when it's handed over, it's got to be machine readable rather than just in a PDF.
Totally, Kobe, exactly. That's why I personally like Kobe, because it is consistent every single time. I've said it in front of people and in conferences, and there's like an audible gasp, but it's standardization, very straightforward. Go to this location for this data, easy.
Fully agree.
And you can teach a Kaplan that very easy. You don't need anything sophisticated to teach Kaplan to read cells or columns or rows.
No, that's interesting, actually. And one thing I'll just share, which is different to what I was just about to share, actually, which is something that we're doing. Let me just share this. Something that we've been working within the office. Can you all see that come through yet?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're creating sort of content which with the aim of making sure it's consistent, compliant, and aligned to the specification or kind of digitally tagged. So this is the kind of view into, for example, the our internal walls. But within our content library, we've created not just things like walls, ceilings, etc., but also looking at things in terms of assemblies. So that could be to do with, for example, bathrooms, which are compliant in terms of their geometrical relationship to different parts within the sort of sink and the bath and the WC, etc. So I think this is picking up on some of the things that just been talked about, where the aim is that we've, again, Andy from the team has sort of created a plugin into Revit, which means that all of our kind of info is held in Notion here, but it means that within Revit, the team members, and we're kind of also changing the way that the team structure. But the idea is that you can go into this library, the content library that we've created, drill down into what is required from that component or assembly, and then choose the relevant one. So and then when you bring it in, it's got the information, but it's also got the geometry, and it's also got the things tagged and specified or linking it to our master specification already. So that's something we've tried to do, and again, it's kind of more powerful also when we've got the assemblies, because there are so many permutations of an accessible, part M43 bathroom, and you would waste a lot of time if you're asking, say, junior members to read Part M, trying to unpick the requirements, and then design it into one of the schemes. So we're trying to kind of get a large amount of whatever the sector of the project, a large amount of it is sort of pre-authored and created, which can then be brought in. Clearly, there's going to be bespoke elements, because all projects will have bespoke elements, and that's where the, I guess, architectural interest or the site-specific requirements kick in. So that, and then again, Andy and Lee, who's the head of spec, and the R&D team are working on to make sure that it is kind of given a particular name, as you mentioned, so then it does allow a door to be then aligned to the ironmongery set, to the specification, etc., etc. So that's something we've been doing to try and standardize the components and make sure they're all kind of working or compliant, which helps us, I guess, as a practice from the Building Safety Act, but also just generally meeting the employer's requirements or the regulations. So that's something that's been working for a long time. Then coming back to the project I mentioned, like I said, it's kind of this.
All right,
this is a
let's
scheme.
get right into it.
Sorry, Jason, James, got your hand up.
I didn't realize it did that. I didn't realize it gave an automatic. Sorry about that. I love that. What I would, the one quick observation, if you have the BG White Book product data reference in there, because that is the one thing that commercials will use to talk back. That
we do, yeah, we've got that in there as well. Yeah, so that's embedded into the so in terms of our little ecosystem of software that we're using, we've got Revit, we've got MBS in terms of the specification side of things, and then Notion is what you saw, but Notion we kind of use it's like kind of like an intranet really for all sorts of things within the practice, all centered around the idea of storing information in database format so that it can be machine readable, it can be filtered, it can be sort of talk to each other as such. So that's something that Andy in our team, who's sort of is an architect but historically it's also kind of leading on the R&D side, so he's very much in kind of aligned to that database mentality, so trying to pick up all those things. So no, thanks for the feedback.
Takeoff should be done from the model and no problem.
Exactly, and then we're kind of tying in information in the master specification and the content library that things to do with obviously carbon, so taking from the databases which are kind of available, I guess, in terms of different materials, so we can extract quantities and get high level guidance for the projects. Clearly there will be sort of more specialists who can drill down into more detail, but just to give us an idea of sort of initial moves that we might make. So that's something we're building in as well. Still got a fair amount to go in terms of picking up all of the components that form various building types. We've started predominantly with sort of internals, floors, ceilings, doors, bathrooms, kitchens, doing the envelope at the moment. So that, like I said, most scenarios we probably have something that's the correct build up specified, etc. So yeah, it kind of like testing it out on a school at the moment, and then on this scheme it's kind of like I said, it's in one way it's very simple, the task. So this is the Resi scheme built like 25 years ago. Unsurprising or surprisingly or unsurprisingly, there is no real information about what was built, even though it's only 25 years old. No as builts. Tried to contact people like the NHBC, who were the approved inspectors at the time, no information. So really having to start from scratch, which is, I think, unfortunately not that uncommon in terms of what we're trying to do generally. As I said, it's kind of treated as a part of the good thing is that most of the building is, from a combustible point of view, is brick. So actually, we're only talking about specific areas, which is related to this sort of timber cladding and the timber decking on the balcony. So again, from a first pilot project that the team are going through, it's a really good one to kind of do, I think. But it just shows you what still the complexities there are. So Wade's had a point cloud survey conducted for the entire estate. So I guess picking up on Pierre, some of the things you do, that surveyor then did the Revit, produced a Revit model. As you can see, fairly basic in terms of the, in terms of internal elements, but externally, accurate geometrically, which is the kind of key thing. And from that, we've then generated this document called a sketchbook, but essentially it's looking at what are the different details that we need to resolve. So one thing is that facade, the timber cladding facade. So we've tried to kind of look at what's existing, keeping in mind we don't have any as-built information. There are areas in here.
Sorry, is that intrusive? How do you know the wall build-up is the point cloud?
Good question. I'll come on to that in a second. So we've kind of made some assumptions in here. So all of the kind of red text is assumptions. Before we started, a company called OFR, who are fire consultants, they did a fire risk assessment external walls review, which included some intrusive surveys on site from externally. So for example, that is why we know what the build-up of this timber cladding is. They kind of cut holes in it. I'll show you some photographs in a minute as well. So some things we are able to know because they have been physically opened up. And then we were then generating proposed build-ups, again, based on, you can see a fair amount of assumptions in terms of the text here. So that's what we started off looking at. And you can see from these photographs, I'll just zoom in a bit. So these were done by the initial, the fire risk assessment external walls. And that's enabled us to take the point cloud survey, which had generic kind of wall thicknesses, 250, whatever, 280 mil thick. We then broke that model to create a more granular version of that external wall based on what we'd found. Still didn't give us the full picture. There were still kind of areas which we didn't know, predominantly what is behind this breather membrane and how thick is the blockwork and etc. behind that. So that was basically the where we kind of started. Hold on a minute, let me just so you can see that we've kind of looked at those kind of things and started to generate the existing and the proposed for all of the different areas within that curved timber. We also had some instances where there were some like an interface between the brickwork and render. So the areas that we were looking to do were essentially based on the fire risk assessment and areas that had to be remediated in order to make the risk tolerable, let's say. And the timber decking, so the balconies all had timber decking, so that had to be removed. And finally, I think it was just there were areas which had they found EPS insulation. Most of the scheme already had mineral, so that was good. But there were some areas, these sort of projected bay windows, which had EPS insulation, for example. So that's something that we were kind of, again, understood some elements of it, but not the whole picture. So that was quite interesting. So this is the views from the 3D survey model. And we were kind of identifying where there could be risks in terms of other EPS insulation or etc. that we may find. So I think what was good here is that even though the building was built only 25 years ago, from a data and information point of view, we had very little. The fire risk assessment intrusive survey was a good start. Then commissioning the point cloud survey to generate accurate information about the as-built status was also very good. And we asked them to do the internal version of that as well, because there were some things that we had to do internally. So that was the
question.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, me again. I didn't want to raise my hand because it did that silly notification, so I just thought I would jump in with voice. When the laser scan, how well did that facade build-up actually match the O&M? I'm just interested. Did the O&M actually match how they built it in terms of the external envelope?
Yeah, there was no O&M that we could find.
No
so
O&M.
None of that. And so what we were looking at is then doing further surveys. Sorry, Cyprian. Hi, Cyprian. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. As soon as I finish answering this question, I just wanted to just jump in with something.
You go ahead, Cyprian. Ask a question.
Okay, so yeah, what I've seen is just really good, impressive. However, you kept saying something word to keep using with regards to assumptions. I'm just to let everyone know where I'm coming from. I'm coming from I'm a design and compliance consultant, so and do advise BRPD and do the BRPD role myself, fulfill the role myself. From experience, especially with lighting projects, we are finding, it has been advised, when we reach out to the BSR, is that they understand that a lot of these properties or these buildings are occupied, but to avoid the risk, any risk of during the project, to be stopping to get to apply for change control. It is advised that we get as much information, existing information. So it's advised that you do 100% instead of doing, if you know that, you're doing a build up and whatever you're building up, there are other elements that you're unsure of. It can affect the application, and it's advised that you get as much information and avoid the assumptions because from experience, applications have been turned down because of that. And coming, going back, the thing is, one of our my application went through simply because it was a hospital and you can't do certain works in an occupied hospital. So we had to do a statement to say, look, this is where, this is what we will do. When we come, because of the occupied hospital, we can't do certain intrusive work. However, for the block, for the facade projects that we have done and involved with, we are getting RFIs asking, we need more information. You are making an assumption here. We notice we have not been given information on what material is existing there. We need to know that whatever you're putting in, they actually integrate and they, it complies and their test evidence that you won't have a negative reaction with the material. So just putting in there that we need to avoid the assumptions at this stage.
No, I 100% agree, Cyprian. And what we did is, so this document was based on, so this is started a little while ago, in terms of what information we knew from the initial fire risk assessment external wall survey. Plus, and then what we were doing in this document is highlighting in all of these details with the different kind of red and the orange and the blue text, which items we didn't know about before we then essentially went back to site to do a further set of intrusive surveys because we had too many unknowns. And so what we then did was I'll show you some of these, which was so we had generated that report from the information we had at the moment. We then commissioned, this was both with structural engineer, ourselves, the fire risk, the fire consultants, essentially a markup of those elevations to kind of identify additional intrusive surveys we wanted, to pick up exactly that point that you made about the unknowns. So for example, this might be a little bit slow to flick through the images. Let me just choose the one. So for example, what we did was, because we weren't 100% sure, we knew what the timber cladding build up to the block work was, but we didn't know beyond that. So for example, we then went back and had a large area removed over the two different areas in the two different blocks as well. Again, to pick up on your point, Cyprian, about not making an assumption that just because it was built one way on one block, that it wasn't built the same way on the other block. So we opened up both of those blocks, and what was good is that we found the same build-up, i.e. essentially concrete slab, block work, these sort of steel posts, and then the timber cladding. There's no insulation on either of those. What we didn't know was the thickness of the block work, because coming back to your point, James, in the survey model was suggesting a 280 millimeter build up from outside of the timber to the internal face of the apartments. And we were like, well, how does that, the numbers don't add up, because we had something like 50 or 100 mil timber building, then that would leave somewhere in the region of 180 mil. But what was 180 mil based on? Was it based on, let's say, block work laid on its side, which is something that was kind of fairly common practice back in the late 90s, or was it 2 layers of block work, for example, or something else? So we had a core test done, which sort of helped because the core drill was sort of 150 mil thick. It showed that there was clearly one layer of block work, then a membrane, and then something else beyond it. Again, when you did the numbers, it wasn't quite adding up in terms of the survey model. So we've, since this intrusive survey, which, as you can see, again, we kind of went through different parts of the different blocks. So we have like 3 different blocks that we tested out all the surveys on the opening up works. We're going to go back again to drill from the inside out, because there's still unknowns. So and we're kind of building that into our digital model from the survey that was done. So trying to fill the gaps, and each time we do some more intrusive surveys, we're kind of picking up on something else that we need to know. To pick up that point, Cyprian, that you made, that I want to get to a stage where in our details and the specification and stuff, we don't have any red notes where we don't know what that buildup is. So all ambiguity has been taken out by carrying out surveys. The structural engineer is now doing the calculations in terms of fixing to the slab edge, which is probably the most realistic solution in terms of the new rain screen cladding system. Just because we don't know, that we can see from the surveys that the block work doesn't look like it's tied into very well to the slabs, etc. So we're kind of bypassing that because it's too much unknowns, and then going on to fixing to the slab edge, for example. So that's kind of, we've got to engage the specialist subcontractors, which will happen in the next sort of couple of weeks. And that's to do with the rain screen cladding, there's injector clad, and the detectors and the balcony replacements and stuff. So all of the specialist subcontractors will get appointed soon, and then we will develop the final construction details, specifications, data sheets, etc., to then go to the gateway submission at the end of January is the target at the moment. Pierre, you got your hand up.
Sorry, just a quick question. It's something that I'm busy doing at the moment, which is looking at the scan from the outside, and in those areas that you've identified at the earliest possible time, to scan from the inside. So you're actually getting the thickness of the buildup. and in the same common areas across, let's say, 2 buildings before you expose it. And it's actually been quite useful to actually have a look at what you anticipate being there and pretty much what did appear. But the bigger part for me would be a record for buildings in this particular location, this area, this region, where typical construction methods might be pretty consistent across the board at different levels, tier 1, 2, and white van brigade. But in reality, just to give you some indicators to how things actually happened. And that would sort of be not an assumption so much, James, as simply opening a common practice and an understanding. And that then becomes part of a guideline to say, consider this. And that's it. Thank you.
No, that's right, Peter, because again, what we found is, so before we went onto site, the original fire risk assessment had opened up various things, but the weird thing was it wasn't necessarily exactly this bay, but one of the bays, EPS was used as the insulation, but we were like, well, was that practice or that material used in other bay windows as well? So as part of the second intrusive survey, core drills were taken into all of these spandrels to make sure that there wasn't any other areas that a bit of rogue EPS was thrown in by the contractor. Luckily, for us, I guess there wasn't any other found. It was just in that one bay that they had decided to use EPS rather than mineral wool, for example. So, and that's also why we wanted to check across the 2 buildings to make sure that the timber cladding buildup was the same across the both as well. So, because clearly, one might have been built slightly later. There might have been some material supply issues, clearly, and they couldn't get everything in time, so they changed the material. But so that's where the danger, I guess, lies, and the need for quite expansive surveys to make sure that you haven't missed something, which then could be a problem when you get to site in terms of the change control things, Cyprian, that you picked up and noted as well. So we've still got a fair amount to go. And as you can imagine, it's sort of now, there's elements with internally that's also coming up in terms of, was it, there's some maintenance stuff that hadn't clearly happened. So, was it built properly in the first place, or has it simply been not maintained properly? So they're getting into sort of grey areas at the moment. But nevertheless, on terms of facade, we are needing to take, I think, one more round of intrusive surveys, and then feeding that into the structural engineer, the specialist subcontractors that'll get appointed, and the facade consultant to make sure that what we're putting back is compliant and is suitable for this particular building type. So that's kind of where we are in terms of that process. James, you got your hand up?
You mentioned material shortage. Were they 2 different buildings? The one at the front to one at the back?
No, they were. If I just go back to, if I go back here,
I would wager they're 2 different subcontractors built it. Would be I would think, first of all, what it does reinforce, I appreciate this is a remediation, but what it does reinforce is if the detail was to not have that membrane, then how is it possible that the building is actually constructed in some locations with that membrane? If you have a proper QA regime where you can evidence how you built something, you would flag something has gone in, not by purely approved detail. Just there is clearly no QA. If one facade that's identical to the next in a different location has been constructed differently.
Yeah, it's who knows what happened in that particular, because it's not even if it was the using EPS on all of the building where that particular detail is, then that would sort of make sense that maybe a different party were using it, but it's only in one bay of the entire 2 buildings. So it's, again, we could kind of go round and round trying to figure it out. But I think, as I say, the bottom line, if you're doing the project now, things like the technologies in terms of scanning, the kind of 360 photography, the time lapse, all of those things are what we're learning, I guess, from this project, what not to do in terms of record keeping. So, I guess that's what, you'll be doing as main contractor to be able to evidence and strip back the time. A bit like, Google Maps and its sort of archived photographs. You can move the toggle and see what it was 20 years ago and what it is now.
It's competency, isn't it? You as a subcontractor, how will you make sure that you are building to the approved detail? And that is a QA matrix, that is a QA plan. We will do this, this, and this. We will evidence it this way. Because that is a great example of non-standardization on one project alone.
Yep. The other thing I just quickly want to show, there's a quite a helpful webinar by the HSC that came out, which was, I won't share it in terms of watching it, but I'll share the link. Is the there's a gentleman on this video which basically goes through the online portal. He goes through the online portal, showing what information is required to make a submission, and whether it's category A works, category B, gateway 2, and gateway 3. So we had an initial gateway kind of checklist and a gateway 3 checklist, and my colleague Lee's sort of been looking at this video and just cross-referencing to see if we've missed anything, because obviously the building safety regulator also changes or has been changing and I guess improving the portal and the way that we can upload drawings, etc. So clearly it's going to evolve, but this is quite a good guide. Like I said, I'll just share it on the chat for everyone to be able to watch that at their own sort of pace. But it is good to kind of dry run it, let's say, virtually. And that let me just share that on the chat right now. Hopefully that'll come through. That's something that we're kind of using just to make sure that we're thinking forward to gateway 3. Again, Pierre, your kind of experience will be really important, because I think a lot of people might get focused on gateway 2 but forget gateway 3, and actually we need to be kind of focusing on that, on the handover and getting the certification and work back in case we miss something that is too late to pick up later down the line.
I think that's a really good point. And we looked at doing this probably 3 years ago when people were registering buildings. And one of the challenges was that people were registering the building. And when they went on to register, they didn't have all the information that they needed to be able to do it, but they didn't know what questions were going to be asked. And there seemed to be a reluctance from the regulator to provide a schema that would determine what information was needed. So from what you've seen there, Daz, do you think we'd be able to generate a standardized schema for the information to be collected and then submitted?
Yes, I would say so, because it goes through each of the questions, and it also shows the information types, drawings, compliance or statements, etc. So I think it's a really good guide. Obviously, it doesn't show you what needs to be in a compliance statement or but that's up to the team to agree depending on the scale of the project, etc. But that's what we're doing, is just updating our gateway 2 and gateway 3 checklist based on this video. But I think it was very clear. So things will evolve, but it's a really, really good overview, I think. Because till you start, as you say, starting an application online, you don't know what the questions are. So this person is from the HSC is basically doing a dummy run through the whole thing.
So is Lee in that exercise that he's going through, because I know how diligent he is he actually determining what those questions are?
Well, this video is showing the entire process. So we're kind of taking, looking at the video that they've done, just taking the questions and the sub kind of questions for each of the bit of topics and creating our kind of database checklist, and then we'll share that with the team and say, well, actually party A needs to supply this, party B needs to supply this, the client needs to supply that. So that's what we're doing at the moment. So, you know, once we do it, more than happy to share it, because, you know, it's nothing secret.
I'm just wondering whether we can break the job down so that you're not doing it all.
It's fun. I think Lee's actually done it quite quickly already. And then Andy's
Okay.
Andy's will hopefully help create sort of a database back of house kind of. We want to present it in a Word way, but it's been generated as a database in the background.
Brilliant. Okay, well done. That looks excellent.
No, I just came across the video. Someone else shared it on another some other chat anyway. But like I said, it is really useful just to be able to dry run, because till you do it, you don't know, and it allows us to really manage what the team needs to produce. So I just wanted to kind of share that, and I realize that some of it might not be exactly relevant to the audience, but I think in terms of data, having the right information, going through the right processes, having the right consultants, and having a realistic program, which, to be fair, on this project, weights are and kind of getting input from everyone, has made it really quite a good pilot for us all to be involved in, because it'll be rolled out across many projects, and I'm sure everyone on this team will be working on projects where similar things are required, whether new or refurb. Don't know if anyone's got any questions immediately.
Not for me, I was vividly interrupting you were talking.
Sorry, James, I didn't quite hear that.
Sorry, I was just apologising again for interrupting you. Thank you.
No. I mean, it's meant to be interactive with the session. So, like I said, it's we will we'll aim to submit at the end of January, and we'll keep everyone in updated. But like I said, in the next kind of sessions like this, what I try to do is to share the next update. So that could be some of the trackers that I talked about, but it's also really nice to get input from your side, so anyone on the call, because this is just my experience and other people have different. So Pierre, from your Gateway 3 submission, it'd be great to kind of hear more of that, if that's possible. So what are the things that we should be looking, on the project I'm working on, or the wider team? So I don't know whether I could maybe volunteer you for a little show and tell next time.
Yes, that'll be my pleasure. I'll try to be as good as what you shown, and just to say a thank you. It was very clear. I think I like the approach, and I think what we experienced with having to go through Gateway 3 was actually a live check of our workflows, because we had to retrospectively basically self-assess how we developed the design for construction to make sure that basically no stone was left unturned. I think that was really the key thing, because we had behind us funders, insurers, obviously building control, looking at absolutely everything. So we had to model everything on the project and make sure, more than just the geometry, to go back to the discussion we had, that the data was there. We had to be sure that every input within the model, from a design perspective or coordination perspective, there was a reason behind it. I think that's really the key thing. You can't have any input in your data, whatever it is, without knowing why, what you are putting in, because you are going to be questioned. You are going to explain why. And it's almost better to know that some data is not in it and why is that, than just working sort of progressing blindly in developing your model. But very happy to bring my colleague and co-founder Jaime in the next session, and together very happy, and Albert as well, who managed the project, to explain how we went through that process retrospectively. That'll be a pleasure.
That'll be fantastic. George, I think you obviously got Pierre's email and stuff, though. We can arrange
Sure.
a date. It'll be where are we now? We're in October, aren't we? So it'll probably be either late October or early November. We normally have so every couple of months or so, because I think because not many, as you say, not many people have gone through the Gateway 3 process. More and more people are, great news, going through the Gateway 2 successfully. It'll be really really valuable, I think, for everyone.
Yes, I mean, very happy to be very open and transparent on the documents that we had to prepare as well. So it's one thing to have the BIM model, but then you need to format the data in a number of documents, almost the old-fashioned way, which can be fully extracted from the BIM model, because it's not just about the design and the model itself, it's about the process. How did we get the right information at the right time? Did we question it? How did we federate it, coordinate it? So it's a sort of hybrid, old-fashioned approach and more modern, if I can say that, with the BIM model itself. So very happy to show the documents, share everything. I guess it's for the benefit of the group. So no problem at all.
No, thank you. James, you had your hand, and then George.
So that conversation earlier about what to model and what not to model, I think Pierre, beg pardon, just touched on it. If it doesn't offer anything from a spatial coordination perspective, that is probably a good conversation point to have. After that, the data, you can have a very basic model or a simple model, but with lots of data that sits behind it. So, the door and the door stopper, I'd probably stop at the door and then embed the data to say that that is a fire door with a stopper that sits with it, is how I would approach it. Because Pierre, you just mentioned that everything had to be modeled. Was that to facilitate the data export, or was it something else that made them want everything to be modeled, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so first I should have said we work mainly in ArchiCAD. So that's our main authoring tool. We use Revit because we developed hybrid workflows between the two for very large projects in Saudi, now in Nigeria, because there is still a demand in BIM protocols to use Revit. We know that it's sometimes against the ISO, but it's to be realistic based on the country you work in. For example, we're bidding in Senegal for a very large campus, a public project, and in Senegal, the BIM environment is built around Revit. We like it or not, you have to deal with it. But our main authoring tool is ArchiCAD, and that's not the debate today, but which allows for some capabilities in modeling, so we can have heavier models with more details. So we try to model as much as we can, depending on the stage, to have the information linked in 2D, 3D, and data. So we extract all the information from the BIM model. We don't do any 2D, it's only input of geometry and data. So, but that being said, we try not to model too much. I really like what you said, James, about a door. You need to have a realistic representation of the door. However, you probably don't need to model all the components of the door. You can embed a lot of data within the BIM objects. So it's always to find that balance, depending on the output which is required by the client, because we didn't talk about it, but it goes without saying that the fee is proportionate to the amount of geometry and data you embed in your model. And sometimes that is the contradiction. It's difficult to convince a client that you need to agree a certain amount of fee to be able to embed a certain amount of geometry and data in your model based on the requirements, for example, for Gateway 3. So yeah, it's a very interesting discussion on that topic. And unfortunately, I don't think there is one answer. And that is the problem. We try to have a generic workflow, but which is still very project specific.
Yeah, I would, the one final point I'd make was Kobe, who touched on earlier, and how it didn't reflect the BIM model. I've actually had clients say to me, don't worry, you don't need to generate this data from the model, to which I would say, there's absolutely no way I'm going through 250,000 lines of Kobe Excel spreadsheet to populate it. that would make my life harder. Plus, so I've had that conversation with clients, and I've said no, we will be doing it in the model because this is just safer and easier actually to get there. I would add that into a client's competency. We've spoken about BSA. How are you producing your door schedules? Take me through it as an example. And if there is we will produce a GA and then we will update and we will issue the Excel. That for me is a competency problem there, and they will fall over and make mistakes. So yeah, they were the only things I wanted to mention based on the conversation. But it was good, fascinating chat.
Thank you very much, George. And then it'd be nice to hear, Franco, what your thoughts are as well. If you want to, I'll go first, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to make you aware of the work that was done last week that you've got access to. So for those of you that don't know, for several years, we've been building data sets with subject matter experts on those asset types. So we've got detailed information that probably upwards of 100 people who are subject matter experts in fire doors, penetration seals and things like that have gone through and done a deep dive explaining what information they need. I'll just show you one example of what that looks like. So for a fire door, for example, this was last reviewed. It was originally done in 2021. It was last reviewed in 23, and we reviewed them again last week. So we had a team of people looking at these, and it breaks down all the different elements of what goes into a door, and what that looks like. But also, it starts from the point of view of the Building Safety Act and what the regulator's looking for. What risks is that particular asset protecting against? And then what do people do to the asset to stop it from working? So this is very valuable stuff. This has come from people on the ground. Also, what information do you need from a point of view of specification, what materials are being used, the construction detail, the installation detail, inspection and maintenance. So we've got this level of detail, what tasks are needed, and then also what competencies needed, and how should change be managed. So we've gone through that exercise with all those different asset types. And last week we ran the workshops. They're all recorded. But what we've also done, which is new, is we've generated an AI podcast, really, that's been generated from the conversation. And I have to say, I think it's extraordinary. And if you're interested, I'll send it to you. But the reason I'm saying all this is that this, I think, is also part of the whole process. And you'll see there what we also did. We broke the asset types into groupings. So that's compartmentation. That's largely smoke control. Here we've got sprinkler systems and risers. And here we've got lighting and emergency lighting and escape signage. So I have to say that we didn't get onto that because we spent most of it, all of our time really on signage and the like. But this is available. So I don't know if that interests anybody, but I think it's useful stuff.
Yes, please, George.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
We've also got a group starting with in a couple of weeks' time on lifts. So this is a brand new one. So we're going to have a group of people who are subject matter experts on lifts telling us what information is needed.
That would be fantastic, because working with lift manufacturers in this context is extraordinarily difficult. So I just say, Yes, they don't want to play at all.
Yeah, we seem to be breaking through that, James. So,
Right.
you know, if you want to be part of that, if you want to be part of any of those, I mean, the first thing is to obviously be able to use and access what we've already produced. What we're also doing from that exercise, we're going to have we're going to spin things off, because what we want to do is start creating agents, AI agents, that can then interrogate that information and then identify what's needed and what isn't needed. Because the challenging thing that I'm coming across all the time, it's the interrelationship of this information that is so critical.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And
Let me have a listen. I will like to be involved.
Yeah, good. Sorry, Daz.
no, I was saying that brought nicely into the M&E world for Franco's thoughts or reflections or any observations or queries.
Well, I would like to make some general considerations. What was said in this meeting is very much related to the concept of level of detail or level of definition, right? As far as I know, there is no rule, standard, regulation about what should be modeled. We've talked about common sense, but as far as I know, there is no clear definition of where the modeling effort should stop. This is the first consideration. And this is, in my opinion, a very, very important aspect, because it leaves this decision to whoever is modeling. The second aspect is, if we agree that something should not be modeled and therefore all the data should sit somewhere else, for example, the elements of a door, the information about the elements of a door should be contained somewhere else. I think that there is another challenge here, which is, how should we structure the level of information of the data sitting outside of the model? For example, looking at the M&E world, if you open an electrical panel, as we all know, you will see many, many small things, right? Each one of them may have a really important function in how the building is performing or functioning. So, for example, if we decide that the panel should only be modeled in terms of its geometry and what is inside should not be modeled, for example, then we need to decide how we organize the information of the mini circuit breakers, switches, whatever is contained in the panel. So I think that these two topics, where is this line between what should be modeled and should not be modeled? And the second topic is, how should we organize the information of the elements that we do not model? I think these two questions are really important from my experience and point of view.
Actually, just on that point, could I just, sorry, just to jump in. One of the things also that is becoming apparent is that when, in particular, let's say Revit, because Pierre, I understand the need to, for not to just be proprietary, but what we're finding is that if a project's going over maybe 3 years, it's a real problem, because when the model is handed over, it's probably still in 2022, right? And unless it's been upgraded progressively by everybody, and people don't do that, a lot of people don't do it, then what you've then got is a problem. And we've just had it recently on a project where we've had to upgrade from all the models, and there's a lot of data, a lot of models, and we've had to upgrade it year by year. This is retrospectively, and it's fortunate that we have all the versions of the software. but a new person coming along wouldn't be able to do that. And also, when you go from one version to another, you can very easily experience data loss or corruption. So I'm just flagging that up because I don't think it's something that is often put into EIRs, that the version that is handed over should be the current version. You should not have to. It shouldn't be down to the client or the asset manager to figure out how they're going to upgrade files that are years old. Sorry.
That's right. I've got.
So if I may close my
POV
considerations.
Oh.
Sorry. If I may finish what I was talking about, there is another aspect that George knows about, which is I would say, passion and expertise in testing and commissioning and handover, right? I can say with some decades of experience behind me that very, very rarely as-built data and as-built and commissioning data are handed over in a proper manner, which makes the asset owner suffer from the lack of correctness of what he sees or what how things should function. So this is another very, very important aspect, to have an as-built data set, not only the geometrical one, but also the data one. That's it. I finished my speech. Okay.
No, Franco, thank you very much. And I'm sure there's lots of sort of knowledge about all of that in the team, which we can continue to talk about. I've got Pierre V first and then Pierre S afterwards to close things out.
Yeah, just very quickly. So with Franco's point there about what do you model? Do you do the DB and everything else separately? I think there's an important one to actually have a look at what I'll call scenario planning. In other words, when you are going and you're actually going to be in the field, you would typically need a circuit diagram to say where are the breakers and where's the circuit. So in other words, the floor plans actually got to indicate that, because I've had that on site in a mall previously, where the circuits, because the tenancy is changing and all the rest of the dynamics that George was talking about, actually had an impact on the ground. The socket outlet wasn't connected to that DB. The circuit would have been correct in the model, but it was elsewhere. The other part I think that's really important is the commissioning part, that the content that is as constructed, I'm going to use the term rather than as built, is the records are never kept up to date. And in particular with the bigger contractors where they've got subcontractors, the subcontractors do not have the competence and the capacity to deliver models of a decent standard. So I think those are all things that we really do need to put in as important derivatives. George is finally on the story about the versions. We are moving into the open BIM world, and one of these days Autodesk will have woken up from their slumber and changed that. But I worked for a big practice in London, and we were on version 2020, and they were still reviewing and updating models of existing facilities on 2014. Fortunately, Autodesk keep all of those copies available, but it is an absolute, I'm not going to say what kind of an ache it is, but having to go year by year and do the quality checking was an enormous resource sponge. And who pays for it is that big problem. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just briefly, not to repeat what has been said, but that idea about software version is coming to an end, be it whatever software you are using, because the end product in terms of as-built model has to be IFC, always had to be. The design team, different people in the design team can produce a proprietary file if needed, and sometimes it's included in the BIM protocol. But the reason why we believe it's over, and it links to what you said, Pierre, about the capabilities of main contractors. So we are 99% there. To give you a practical example, on the new stadium in Casablanca, the Hassan II Stadium, 115,000. We are in final discussion with the two co-contractors who won it, which are the biggest one in Morocco. The reason why we are there is not because we are a big practice, we're not an old practice, it's because we are bringing what we call the hybrid workflow, where we're going to use ArchiCAD for the master model to be able to have in one file the entire stadium, and Revit for what we call the micro models, because we have to work with different disciplines. Combining all of that means it's impossible to give an as-built model in any proprietary format, because the information, geometry and data is scattered between this meta model and micro models. The only way to have an as-built model which encompasses everything is IFC. And that is the only way to give an as-built model to the end client. So I think that discussion about what version we use and upgrading is still true, but I think it's slowly, and thankfully, from my perspective, I'm happy to be challenged on that, getting out of the picture.
That's fantastic.
I'm intrigued as to how you deal with parametrics in IFC, Pierre.
Between the two file formats, you mean?
No, well, Revit, for example, IFC is like PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but so you can get a lot of parametricity between one and another, and back and forth. So, for example,
I don't think so. In which IFC, I don't think so. I don't think you can. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, the last conversation I had on this was Thomas Liebisch, who is one of the authors of IFC4. Yeah,
so
and he said that it didn't support
to give you a practical
parametrics.
Example with SnapTwin. So sorry, I shared the link, like probably, selfish marketing, but our algorithm creates the IFC space automatically from the point cloud. And these IFC spaces, you import them in ArchiCAD, they become a native zone, so parametric zone with all the data and the parametricity. You import them in Revit and they become native rooms with all the data and the parametricity. So it is possible to move.
Yeah, that's fairly basic. Sorry, what I mean by parametric is where you've got a door and a wall. So you place the door in the wall, and in Revit, there's a series of parametrics that actually go to make that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
So, sorry, I'm probably going into too much detail.
And I'm going to bring Jaime, who is really the brain in BIM for us. I'm just a beginner compared to him, but that's where the interoperability between the software is important, and that's why using ArchiCAD is another strength, because Nemetschek, owning Graphisoft and developing ArchiCAD, is insisting a lot on the interoperability between Revit and ArchiCAD in that instance, but there are other solutions, which with our workflow allows anyone to use Revit to model, and to a very high degree, we can bring all of that in ArchiCAD, for example, and keep the parametricity. The challenge, and I'll just finish on that, which has been since we started that hybrid workflow in 2001 in Riyadh, is more the extraction of 2D information, because ArchiCAD and Revit are fundamentally different. So whatever you create in Revit, you can bring it in ArchiCAD, keep the parametricity, but you don't keep the 2D output. So there are a number of tricks that you can use to keep that, but I would say the technological limitation at the moment is toward the 2D output between the two, back and forth. We are working on it, but that will never be solved, because Autodesk and Nemetschek are happy to bring the interoperability to a certain level, but will never develop a unified solution, unfortunately.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Pierre, and yeah, maybe you could touch upon some of those things in the presentation. I'll email you separately about with George about a time, and then we'll send. But it's been great to meet lots of new people today, and those in the background as well. And Cyprian, thank you for contributing. And we'll see you next time, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Des. You've done a great job.
Ciao to all.
Thanks,
Bye.
Des.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.